For several years now, Minnesota and the rest of the U.S. has been in the thick of an opioid abuse epidemic. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimates 91 people die each day from an opioid overdose. But there are efforts both at the state and federal level to try and turn that deadly trend around. Today we have two Minnesota lawmakers who've been personally impacted by the opioid crisis. Senator Chris Eaton of Brooklyn Center lost a daughter to an overdose, and Representative Dave Baker of Willmar also lost a son to an overdose. And we should mention both of those cases, I believe, involve heroin, right?
My daughter was involved with heroin, but I believe Senator Baker would.
My son actually died of a heroin overdose as well, but he started with the pills.
And started with opioids and prescription drugs. And we're going to talk about how one can lead to the other and why you two now are so involved in trying to do something about this at a government level. And Senator Eaton, let me start with you because I want to put a human face on this. Tell me about your daughter and about what happened in her case and how that is essentially what drives you today in this work you're doing in the legislature.
Yeah, I was aware that my daughter had something. I thought she was involved in too much alcohol, but I aware she had some kind of problem, but I didn't know she was using opioids until the police knocked at my door and told us that she was deceased and that she had used in a car in a parking lot and that they were unable to revive her.
And we're looking at a picture of her on the screen, and they were unable to revive her, and someone could have called for help but didn't, and that has led to some legislation, hasn't it?
Correct. The young man who was with her thought it was more important to hide the evidence and not get arrested than to call for help for my daughter. And then the first person on the scene was a Brooklyn Center police officer who didn't carry naloxone or Narcan because they couldn't at the time. So by the time she got naloxone, it was like 45 minutes from the onset.
And that can be a lifesaver, obviously. And
right.
now that can be carried.
Right.
And there's also a law that if someone sees someone in distress and maybe they're even involved in what has been a crime, they can call and not be penalized.
Correct. That was Steve's law, and that is one of the components that they can call and receive immunity for prosecution for any of the drug paraphernalia or drugs on the scene. And first responders can carry naloxone, and third party, anybody can use it and be immune from prosecution.
And Representative Baker, tell me about your son. He was at the University of St. Thomas, I believe.
He was.
And he had not been involved with drugs. He ended up getting prescribed medication for what I believe was a fairly minor back injury.
Back injury, back pain is where it started. And again, he was not really the partying type in high school. And we saw some indicators we were concerned in his freshman year of college. So by the time he was a junior at St. Thomas, we saw some real issues and some concerns. And we really needed to understand this epidemic more than we did. And even though his doctor told him right away that this drug that you're taking can be very addictive, Dan, our beautiful son, and we just didn't quite understand the strength that this synthetic heroin has when you prescribe those for pain. And we're kind of masking some of the problems with this by reducing the pain so much that people don't even know what the real problem is. So it took us a couple of years to actually figure it out, but at that time he had gotten into the throes of addiction, and we lost him after about 4 short years of him from starting the first pill to when he actually passed away.
And oftentimes when you get hooked on these prescription drugs, then their supply gets cut off, and then they look for something else that will give them that similar high, and too often it's heroin.
That's the cheapest and the best way to describe it. They don't have the ability to continue to get more pills because the medical community is realizing now, I think, better, that they need to slow down the flow of pills. They shouldn't be asking the patients so quickly, how's your pain today? Let me just give you another 60 or 90 pills. It is causing this. They're helping their patients, they think, in one way. But the other hand, the brains are reacting in a way, and especially young brains that are under 24, 25 years old, they react differently than someone a little bit older than we are because they get a taste of this absolute euphoria, and they don't know how to deal with this. So it's so powerful and so strong. We're just really trying to make sure that we connect with the medical communities, and they are doing more, but it is a big message that we got to bring out to Minnesotans.
And Senator, you talked about some of the legislation that has already passed. Some of those things help in the aftermath of somebody already being addicted and having a problem. What are you trying to do at the front end that could maybe help keep people out of this cycle of addiction?
Well, both Representative Baker and I have been trying to work on legislation to encourage or mandate that doctors use the prescription monitoring program, where they can look up on the computer when a patient comes and see if they've been prescribed any narcotics in the past. Right now it's voluntary, and we'd really like everybody to use it so that there's the doctor shopping or the pill mills don't happen. I'm on the prescription monitoring, or the opioid prescription work group for the state of Minnesota with a number of doctors, and we're working on guidelines for prescribing.
And that doctor shopping is a problem. We've seen it, of course, in the Prince case. So the whole world is hearing about that, Representative Baker, and that is a problem. And obviously you want to educate doctors and the rest of us about that problem. But what can you do from a state law perspective?
We can't legislate our way out of this problem. And I think that between Senator Eaton and I, we're trying to educate our colleagues about getting more information on the actual pill containers. So every time you open it up, we should have a sticker there, which is in our legislation this year, about reminding people this is an opioid, this is highly addictive. We want to make sure that the pain assessments that doctors are sort of paid a little bit better is taken away from the survey results from patients about how their pain was handled. That should not be a part of why doctors want to prescribe more. We're making some good changes. We're also trying to find folks that are in the throes of addiction, that we've got some very good tapering programs out there that really help people get back on. There is hope out there. And part of our biggest issue that we are dealing with, addiction is a disease, and we want to try to help remove that stigma of knowing that there is really help out there for people that want to get better. They don't want to be an addict, and they're ashamed, and we just need to make sure that we keep talking about that.
Is one good thing that has come out of the Prince case the fact that it has really put a spotlight on this problem, along with efforts that you two have undertaken?
Yes, Prince got opioids because of his back from his routines on the stage. He had injured himself, and his hip or something. Anyway, one of the things about getting the publicity was that people are more willing to talk about it, and it is decreasing the stigma a little bit. But, a third of the people who use opioids become addicted, and that there's a brain structure that changes, after about 10 days of them. And after a while, you just need them to feel normal.
And I think Chris and I have talked too, that there's a place for short-term opioid use. There is also a place for this in some long-term or near-death experiences for some patients. So we aren't here blanketing anybody that's taking an opioid that you're doing something wrong. You're not. And the medical community wants to help in the pain. But just understand that after 10 days, your brain starts reacting differently to this pain and what's really causing it. And we have been overwhelmed with emails and folks that have wanted to get help and they want to talk about this more.
And finally, just 30 seconds left. You're a Republican, you're a Democrat. This is an issue that really shouldn't be partisan, right?
It's
Senator?
not. It's bipartisan. We have authors in both the House and the Senate that are both parties.
We are. This is an easy one to work on. We actually all, four of us, wrote a letter, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans around the whole state of Minnesota, picked up a lot of local newspapers to talk about the best thing that we can do is talk about this in our local communities to know the strength of these synthetic heroin pills that are taking care of pain, but just know it's very powerful stuff, and just please be careful with this stuff.
Well, it is heartening to see 2 people like you channel your grief into something very positive and productive, and I'm sure your children would be very proud of what you're doing.
They would be. I think
Thank you.
happy. Yep.
On their behalf. Senator and Representative, thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Face Off is coming up next. We'll be back.